Pat, I want to get a Giants vibe check. Because, look, there's always going to be a lot of outside noise in that market. But man, you've got John Mara just dodging the media at the owners' meetings. It sounds like maybe there's some infighting. What's the vibe in that building right now?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
I know it's a
So,
loaded question.
well, the last part of the question is the headline. So Brian Dable and Joe Shane came in speaking very publicly, and John Mara as well, about how collaborative they would be as a duo coming from Buffalo together. Shane gets hired,
Mhm.
brings Dable with him. And this was the Giants' way of changing the narrative and blaming Joe Judge and Dave Gettleman and their lack of communication on all of the issues that they felt like had gone wrong, even though it was obviously much more complicated than that. And then at first in 2022, with Martindale as the defensive coordinator and then Dable, Shane kind of working together to make the roster moves. And then you had Dable and Martindale working together collaboratively on game plans. That was the best version of what we've seen so far from this regime. Not coincidentally, because like I said, it was people putting their heads together for the common good. Since then, things have fractured. First, it started with Dable with the coaching staff on the sidelines in games, finger
Yep.
pointing, blaming. Joe Shane ended up, as I reported first back then, on the headsets monitoring Dable and the coach's dynamic for a full month, 4 straight games during that season, as it all came to a head. And then Martindale ends up resigning from the coaching staff coming out of 2023. So you fast forward to where we are in 2024, coming off of a 3-14 season. Obviously, in the lack of patience on John Mara and ownership's end is growing. And the biggest detail that came out of Mara's comments about how frustrated he is, how much he's losing patience on Black Monday, is after Mara speaks, we then speak to Brian Dable and Joe Shane. Typically, because they are always promoting the collaborative element, Shane
Mhm.
and Dable take a stage together and sit together at a table and take questions from the assembled media. And usually, obviously, it's a lot of it's for the general manager, but Dable sits there as a symbolic gesture of it's us together. We're both in this together. That day, Brian Dable, after John Mara spoke, took a podium by himself, standing, looking very lonely, solo act in the indoor facility. And then Shane spoke on his own at a table sitting at the dais on the stage in the auditorium. It was an interesting dynamic coming out of a very tense meeting that Mara had with Shane and Dable, where they spoke about what had gone wrong and where they go from here.
Mm.
And the long and short of it, Katie, was this. John Mara said he was tired of all of it, but he put a lot more onus on what Brian Dable needed to fix than what he felt Shane needed to fix. He said he had rave
Okay.
reviews of the process from the personnel end, but on the coaching side, there was a lot of talk of he should give up play calling. There's a lot of things about how he does his job he needs to change. Since then, from what sources have told me, that Dable and Shane have been functioning throughout this offseason as more separate entities than ever prior to this. And so how does this manufacture itself, or how does this manifest itself in how the team functions and how they
Mhm.
manage the free agency and draft and how they succeed? I think there's a lot of concern inside the building of what impact this is going to have once the games start, because the fact of the matter is, when Mara retained Shane and Dable, as I reported, as many people were reporting at that time, and I'm sure you, Katie, felt the same way, it felt like Dable could get fired. It felt like both of them could get fired.
I did
Nobody
feel that way.
really, right? Yeah, I'm sure you did. Nobody truly fully anticipated that no one would lose their jobs here.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that on the personnel side, so this means, on the front office side, there was internally, I was told this recently, there was a little bit of a hope that the coaching staff, Dable and the coaching staff, were going to get blown out of there so that Joe Shane, the front office, could reset with a better coaching staff and maybe extend their clock a little bit, draft a
Mm.
quarterback, maybe run a better offense. So that sentiment, even though obviously they're not saying it to each other's faces, that sentiment existing, that creates a lot of awkwardness when the coaching staff is retained, but people kind of understand where they stand, right? On the coaching
Yeah.
side, on the front office side. And so now you have this awkwardness of, maybe we're both tied together. Maybe we're both tethered as far as our fates go, as far as how John Mara and Steve Tisch are judging us. And there's discomfort on a lot of ends of how that's going to happen. And just the fact that there wasn't any change made and that they feel like they're going into the 2025 season without enough altered in order to give them the best chance to succeed.
Ooh, that team, man. As an outsider, it's all pretty wild to watch because, yeah, I'm not in that market, but from what we've seen out here, there's just wild moves being made. You were down in Florida for the owners' meetings. Any other big takeaways?
Giants wise, I would say it was interesting to me. I observed Joe Shane having an extended conversation with Mike Borgonzi, the general manager from the Tennessee Titans. Now,
Okay.
it was no secret coming out of the NFL Combine that with the Giants losing out on Matthew Stafford, that they were, yes, pivoting to potentially Aaron Rodgers, but also that they were looking into trading up for the number one overall pick in Cam Ward if the Tennessee Titans would entertain it. Of course, that went from conversations to sounding like the Titans weren't really interested anymore in having those talks. So it felt like, we can't get inside the brains of either of those GMs there, but it
Mhm.
profiled like the public nature of the meeting, the extended nature of the conversation. It looked like a scenario where Joe Shane was taking, as he said, one more swing, at that possibility, which again, given the landscape of the quarterback market in the draft, not the wrong thing to do from Shane's standpoint if he feels like he really needs to get a franchise QB. But
Mhm.
if it's not Ward, who is it? Because I think what every Giants fan should understand going into the draft at the moment, NFL fan, even from watching the NFL draft from afar at the top for those top three picks, Shane has spent the last month, including the owners' meetings down there in Florida, being adamant that he's not going to force a QB if he doesn't think he's there. And generally, for people who aren't following the Giants day in and day out and have a much sunnier disposition, I would imagine, because of it, because of all the losses we endure over here. But for people who aren't watching Joe Shane day in and day out, when he tells you this type of stuff, you should believe him. Like when he says constantly, I'm not going to force a quarterback if he's not there. I don't have to take a guy in the first round or the second or the third if he's not there. It's like you should listen to him because
Mhm.
he's telling you, he's really laying the groundwork and the foundation for the possibility it's not going to happen. And at that point, he's not going to want it to be Joe Shane was desperate for a quarterback and still didn't take one. What happened? He swung and missed. He's going to want the narrative to be, I would have taken one if it was there, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
So I think that's a primary takeaway. And then the other one would be, I don't think Brian Daboll's giving away play calling. I was told early in the offseason, as he was saying, it was a possibility. I was told that internally he had made no moves to anybody like to signify that he had any intention of doing so. And then at the NFL owners meetings, it was the same vibe. You talk about Giants vibes. Giants vibes are that Brian Dable is going to go out doing this his way because he can sense throughout the building, all of the dynamic that I've just described.
Last question for you, Pat. Where do you see the Giants in the division this season? The Eagles coming off a Super Bowl win, the Commanders continue to improve. The Cowboys are doing Cowboys things. Are the Giants the clear fourth place team? Like, is that their absolute ceiling? Could they maybe move them up?
Their ceiling would be third if the Cowboys, spiral into some weird disaster that feels possible. But the one thing about Dallas is they've always had more talent on the field, at least in the last 5 years or 6 years or so than the Giants, even when they've had trouble.
Mhm.
They have those high end players like the CDs and the Dax and the Micah Parsons, and they're just a team that drafts well enough to typically have enough talent. Also, the Giants never beat them head to head. I don't know if it's 14 in a row or 16 in a row or what it is, but the Giants never beat them. So to predict the Giants to finish higher than fourth in the division would be more hope than
Mhm.
fact based, I believe. Now, if the Giants stay healthy, which is a big if, they
Yep.
could end up having the offensive and defensive fronts, especially if they draft another offensive lineman and another D lineman, to be able to compete a little bit more there, Katie, so that they're in these games in the fourth quarter. But if they continue to be overwhelmed up front and they don't invest enough and they don't have enough depth when Andrew Thomas goes down, then it's going to be the same old result. They do have the fourth best starting quarterback, no matter what, going into the season in the division. That is what I would say, and that never portends success.